The fascinating history of West Africa. Did you know West Africa was home to some of the most advanced civilizations in history? The powerful Ghana, Mali, and Songhai empires thrived on gold, salt, and trans-Saharan trade. These networks connected the region to North Africa, Europe, and beyond, making it a hub of cultural and economic exchange. Mansa Musa, Mali's legendary ruler, is often considered the wealthiest person in history. His famous 14th-century pilgrimage to Mecca showcased the region's immense riches and spread its influence worldwide. Musa's reign also made Mali a center of learning, with Timbuktu becoming a beacon of Islamic education and culture. West Africa's history took a darker turn with colonization. European powers scrambled to exploit the region's abundant resources, disrupting local governance and culture. Yet communities resisted. Figures like Samori Touré and others fought bravely to defend their lands, leaving a legacy of resilience amidst colonial domination. Did you know that long before Europe's great cities rose to power, West Africa was home to some of the richest and most advanced civilizations the world had ever seen? From the mighty warriors of the Dahomey Kingdom to the legendary wealth of Mansa Musa, the richest man in history, this is the untold story of West Africa's incredible past. But how did these powerful empires rise and fall? What secrets lie hidden in their ancient cities? Stick around, because today we're uncovering a history that will change the way you see Africa forever. Before we dive in, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an epic journey into history. What if I told you that some of the greatest civilizations in history weren't in Europe or Asia, but right here in West Africa? Empires so wealthy they controlled the world's gold trade. Kingdoms so powerful their armies struck fear across the continent. Leaders so legendary their stories are still told today. Ever heard of Mansa Musa, the richest man who ever lived? Or the ancient city of Timbuktu, where knowledge flowed like gold? What happened to these mighty civilizations? And why don't we hear more about them? Stick around, because today we're diving deep into the hidden history of West Africa, one of the most fascinating and misunderstood regions in the world. Before we begin, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon, because this is just the beginning of an incredible journey through history. The history of West Africa has been divided into its prehistory, the Iron Age in Africa, the period of major polities flourishing, the colonial period, and finally the post-independence era, in which the current nations were formed. West Africa is west of an imagined north-south axis, lying close to 10 degrees east longitude, bordered by the Atlantic Ocean and Sahara Desert. Colonial boundaries are reflected in the modern boundaries between contemporary West African states, cutting across ethnic and cultural lines, often dividing single ethnic groups between two or more states. West African populations were considerably mobile and interacted with one another throughout the population history of West Africa. Acheulean tool-using archaic humans may have dwelled throughout West Africa since at least between 780,000 BP and 126,000 BP. Middle Pleistocene. During the Pleistocene, Middle Stone Age peoples, Iwo Elaru people, possibly Aterians, who dwelled throughout West Africa between MS4 and MS2, were gradually replaced by incoming Late Stone Age peoples, who migrated into West Africa as an increase in humid conditions resulted in the subsequent expansion of the West African forest. West African hunter-gatherers occupied western Central Africa, e.g. Shumlaka, earlier than 32,000 BP, dwelled throughout coastal West Africa by 12,000 BP, migrated northward between 12,000 BP and 8,000 BP as far as Mali, Burkina Faso, and Mauritania, and persisted as late as 1,000 BP or some period of time after 1500 CE. After the Kelesif period, Roundhead period, and pastoral period of the Central Sahara, sedentary farming developed in West Africa among the ancestors of modern West Africans. The iron industry, in both smelting and forging for tools and weapons, emerged in West Africa as early as 2631 BCE, and by 400 BCE, contact had been made with the Mediterranean civilizations. And a regular trade included exporting gold, cotton, metal, and leather in exchange for copper, horses, salt, textiles, beads, and slaves. The Tichit culture developed in 2200 BCE and lasted until around 200 BCE. The Nok culture developed in 1500 BC and vanished under unknown circumstances around 500 CE. Serer people constructed the Senegambian stone circles between 3rd century BCE and 16th century CE. The Sahelian kingdoms were a series of kingdoms or empires that were built on the Sahel, the area of grasslands south of the Sahara. They controlled the trade routes across the desert and were also quite decentralized, with member cities having a great deal of autonomy. The Ghana Empire may have been established as early as the 3rd century CE. It was succeeded by the Soso in 1230, the Mali Empire in the 13th century CE, and later by the Songhai and Sokoto Caliphate. There were also a number of forest empires and states in this time period. Following the collapse of the Songhai Empire, a number of smaller states arose across West Africa, including the Bambara Empire of Segu, the Lesser Bambara Kingdom of Kaarta, the Fula Malinke Kingdom of Kasso, in present-day Mali's Kayes region, and the Kenedugu Empire of Sikasso. European traders first became a force in the region in the 15th century. The Atlantic slave trade began, with the Portuguese taking hundreds of captives back to their country for use as slaves. This began on a grand scale after Christopher Columbus' voyage to the Americas and the subsequent demand for cheap colonial labor. As the demand for slaves increased, some African rulers sought to supply the demand by constant war against their neighbors, resulting in fresh captives. European, American, and Haitian governments passed legislation prohibiting the Atlantic slave trade in the 19th century, though the last country to abolish the institution was Brazil in 1888. In 1725, the cattle-herding Fulanis of Futa Jalon launched the first major reformist jihad of the region, overthrowing the local animist, Mand-speaking elites and attempting to somewhat democratize their society. At the same time, the Europeans started to travel into the interior of Africa to trade and explore. Mungo Park, 1771 to 1806, made the first Urios expedition into the region's interior, tracing the Niger River as far as Timbuktu. French armies followed not long after. In the scramble for Africa in the 1880s, the Europeans started to colonize the inland of West Africa. They had previously mostly controlled trading ports along the coasts and rivers. Following World War II, campaigns for independence sprung up across West Africa, most notably in Ghana under the Pan-Africanist Kwame Nkrumah, 1909 to 1972. After a decade of protests, riots and clashes, French West Africa voted for autonomy in a 1958 referendum, dividing it into the states of today. Most of the British colonies gained autonomy the following decade. Since independence, West Africa has suffered from the same problems as much of the African continent, particularly dictatorships, political corruption, and military coups. It has also seen civil wars. The development of oil and mineral wealth has seen the steady modernization of some countries since the early 2000s, though inequality persists. Geography of Africa. Africa is a continent comprising 63 political territories, representing the largest of the great southward projections from the main mass of Earth's surface. Within its regular outline, it comprises an area of 30,368,609 kilometers, 11,385 square miles, excluding adjacent islands. Its highest mountain is Kilimanjaro. Its largest lake is Lake Victoria. West Africa is west of an imagined north-south axis lying close to 10 degrees east longitude. The Atlantic Ocean forms the western and southern borders of the West African region. The northern border is the Sahara Desert, with the Ranashanu Bend generally considered the northernmost part of the region. The eastern border is less precise, with some placing it at the Benue Trough, and others on a boundary line spanning from Mount Cameroon to Lake Chad. The area located north of West Africa is primarily desert containing the Western Sahara. Ancient West Africa included the Sahara, which became a desert by 3000 BCE. During the last glacial period, the Sahara, extending south far beyond the boundaries that now exist. The area located at the south of the desert is a steppe, a semi-arid region, called the Sahel. It is the ecoclimatic and biogeographic zone of transition in Africa between the Sahara Desert to the north and the Sudanian savanna to the south. The Sudanian savanna is a broad belt of tropical savanna that spans the African continent, from the Atlantic Ocean coast in the west, Sudanian savanna, to the Ethiopian highlands in the east, Sudanian savanna. The Guinean region is a traditional name for the region that lies along the Gulf of Guinea. It stretches north through the forested tropical regions and ends at the Sahel. The Guinean forests of West Africa is a belt of tropical moist broadleaf forests along the coast, spanning from Sierra Leone and Guinea through Liberia, Côte d'Ivoire and Ghana and Togo, to the Sanaga River of Cameroon in the east. The Upper Guinean forests and Lower Guinean forests are divided by the Dahomey Gap, a region of savanna and dry forest in Togo and Benin. The forests are a few hundred kilometers inland from the Atlantic Ocean coast on the southern part of West Africa. Climate of Africa. The climate of Africa is a range of climates such as the equatorial climate, the tropical wet and dry climate, the tropical monsoon climate, the semi-arid climate, semi-desert and steppe, the desert climate, hyper-arid and arid, the humid subtropical climate, and the subtropical highland climate. Temperate climates are rare across the continent, except at very high elevations and along the fringes. In fact, the climate of Africa is more variable by rainfall amount than by temperatures, which are consistently high. African deserts are the sunniest and the driest parts of the continent, owing to the prevailing presence of the subtropical ridge with subsiding hot, dry air masses. Africa holds many heat-related records. The continent has the hottest extended region year-round, the areas with the hottest summer climate, the highest sunshine duration, and more. Owing to Africa's position across equatorial and subtropical latitudes in both the northern and southern hemisphere, several different climate types can be found within it. The continent mainly lies within the intertropical zone between the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn, hence its interesting density of humidity. Precipitation intensity is always high, and it is a hot continent. Warm and hot climates prevail all over Africa, but mostly the northern part is marked by aridity and high temperatures. Only the northernmost and the southernmost fringes of the continent have a Mediterranean climate. The equator runs through the middle of Africa, as do the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn, making Africa the most tropical continent. In 15,000 BP, the West African monsoon transformed the landscape of Africa and began the Green Sahara period. Greater rainfall during the summer season resulted in the growth of humid conditions, e.g. lakes, wetlands, and the savanna, e.g. grassland, shrubland in North Africa. Between 5,500 BP and 4,000 BP, the Green Sahara period ended. Cultural history. The culture of Africa is varied and manifold, consisting of a mixture of countries with various tribes depicting their unique characteristic and trait from the continent of Africa. It is a product of the diverse populations that inhabit the continent of Africa and the African diaspora. Generally, culture can be defined as a collective mass of distinctive qualities belonging to a certain group of people. These qualities include laws, morals, beliefs, knowledge, art, customs, and any other attributes belonging to a member of that society. Culture is the way of life of a group of people. Africa has numerous ethnic nationalities, all with varying qualities such as language, dishes, greetings, dressing, dances, and music. However, each of the regions of Africa share a series of dominant cultural traits which distinguish various African regional cultures from each other and the rest of the world. For example, social values, religion, morals, political values, economics, and aesthetic values all contribute to various African cultures. Expressions of culture are abundant within Africa, with large amounts of cultural diversity being found not only across different countries, but also within single countries. Even though within various regions the cultures are widely diverse, they are also, when closely studied, seen to have many similarities. For example, the morals they uphold, their love and respect for their culture, as well as the strong respect they hold for the aged and the important, i.e., kings and chiefs. Colonial boundaries are reflected in the modern boundaries between contemporary West African states, cutting across ethnic and cultural lines, often dividing single ethnic groups between two or more states. In contrast to most of Central, Southern, and Southeast Africa, West Africa is not populated by Bantu-speaking peoples. West Africa and early Stone Age. West African populations were considerably mobile and interacted with one another throughout the population history of West Africa. Acheulean tool-using archaic humans may have dwelled throughout West Africa since at least between 780,000 BP and 126,000 BP, Middle Pleistocene. During the Pleistocene, Middle Stone Age peoples, e.g., Iwo-Elaru people, possibly Atyrians, who dwelled throughout West Africa between MS4 and MS2, were gradually replaced by incoming Late Stone Age peoples, who migrated into West Africa as an increase in humid conditions resulted in the subsequent expansion of the West African forest. West African hunter-gatherers occupied Western Central Africa, e.g., Shumlaka, earlier than 32,000 BP, dwelled throughout coastal West Africa by 12,000 BP, and migrated northward between 12,000 BP and 8,000 BP as far as Mali, Burkina Faso, and Mauritania. During the Holocene, Niger-Congo speakers independently created pottery in Ouagadougou, Mali, the earliest pottery in Africa, by at least 9400 BC, and along with their pottery, as well as wielding independently invented bows and arrows, migrated into the Central Sahara, which became their primary region of residence by 10,000 BP. The emergence and expansion of ceramics in the Sahara may be linked with the origin of Roundhead and Kel Esuf rock art, which occupy rock shelters in the same regions, e.g., Jado, Akakas, Tadrart. Hunters in the Central Sahara farmed, stored, and cooked undomesticated Central Saharan flora, underwent domestication of antelope, and domesticated and shepherded Barbary sheep. After the Kel Esuf period and Roundhead period of the Central Sahara, the pastoral period followed. Some of the hunter-gatherers who created the Roundhead rock art may have adopted pastoral culture, and others may have not. As a result of increasing aridification of the Green Sahara, Central Saharan hunter-gatherers and cattle herders may have used seasonal waterways as the migratory route taken to the Niger River and Chad Basin of West Africa. In 2000 BCE, Thiaroye woman, also known as the Venus of Thiaroye, may have been the earliest statuette created in sub-Saharan West Africa. It may have particularly been a fertility statuette, created in the region of Senegambia, and may be associated with the emergence of complexly organized pastoral societies in West Africa between 4000 BCE and 1000 BCE. Though possibly developed as early as 5000 BCE, Nsibidi may have also developed in 2000 BCE, as evidenced by depictions of the West African script on Ikom monoliths at Ikom in Nigeria. Migration of Saharan peoples south of the Sahelian region resulted in seasonal interaction with and gradual absorption of West African hunter-gatherers, who primarily dwelt in the savannas and forests of West Africa. In West Africa, which may have been a major regional cradle in Africa, for the domestication of crops and animals, Niger-Congo speakers domesticated the helmeted guinea fowl between 500 BP and 1300 BP. Domestication of field crops occurred throughout various locations in West Africa, such as yams, Dioscorea, Prihensilis, in the Niger River Basin between eastern Ghana and western Nigeria, northern Benin, rice, Oriza glaberrima, in the inner Niger Delta region of Mali, pearl millet, Centrus americanus, in northern Mali and Mauritania, and cowpeas in northern Ghana. After having persisted as late as 1000 BP, or some period of time after 1500 CE, remaining West African hunter-gatherers, many of whom dwelt in the forest savanna region, were ultimately acculturated and admixed into the larger groups of West African agriculturalists, akin to the migratory Bantu-speaking agriculturalists and their encounters with Central African hunter-gatherers. Iron Age. Archaeometallurgical scientific knowledge and technological development originated in numerous centers of Africa. The centers of origin were located in West Africa, Central Africa, and East Africa. Consequently, as these origin centers are located within Inner Africa, these archaeometallurgical developments are thus native African technologies. The iron industry, in both smelting and forging for tools and weapons, appeared in West Africa by about 2600–1200 BC. Iron smelting facilities in Niger and Nigeria have been radiocarbon dated to 500 to 1000 BC and more recently in Nigeria from 2000 BC. Though there is some uncertainty, some archaeologists believe that iron metallurgy was developed independently in West Africa. Archaeological sites containing iron smelting furnaces and slag have been excavated at sites in the Nsukka region of southeast Nigeria, in what is now Igboland, dating to 2000 BC at the site of Leja, Eze Uzomaka, 2009, and to 750 BC and at the site of Opi, Hall, 2009. Iron metallurgy may have been independently developed in the Nok culture between the 9th century BC and 550 BCE. More recently, Bandama and Babalola, 23, have indicated that iron metallurgical development occurred 2631 BCE, 348 BCE at Leja in Nigeria, 21st BCE, 921 BCE at Obui in Central Africa Republic, 1895 BC at Chirauma in Niger, and 1051 BC at Dekpasanwere in Togo. The increased use of iron and the spread of ironworking technology led to improved weaponry and enabled farmers to expand agricultural productivity and produce surplus crops, which together supported the growth of urban city-states into empires. By 400 BC, contact had been made with the Mediterranean civilizations, including that of Carthage, and a regular trade in gold conducted with the Saharan Berbers, as noted by Herodotus. The trade was fairly small until the camel was introduced, with Mediterranean goods found in pits as far south as northern Nigeria. A profitable trade had developed by which West Africans exported gold, cotton cloth, metal ornaments, and leather goods north.